specifically, let's start with the New Mexico situation. They tried to pass this we've described it as a rebrand of the assault weapons ban. Can you talk a little bit about what the bill actually is and does and what happened with it?
Right. So this was New Mexico's legislative session just ended this past Thursday. It was a 30-day session. I guess they alternate between odd and even number years. Sometimes it's 60 days, sometimes it's 30. So it was an abbreviated session. But one of the main agenda items was what has been called the GOSAFE Act, the Gas Operated Semi-Automatic Firearm Exclusion Act. So kind of a cheeky name there. And longtime listeners and readers might recall that this is actually a federal proposal by a New Mexico Senator, Martin Heinrich, along with Angus King of Maine and some co-sponsors, Mark Kelly from Arizona and Michael Bennett from Colorado. And they're telling it is essentially a rebrand of an assault weapon ban because, quote unquote, they want to regulate how firearms function and what makes them deadly rather than cosmetic features. So it's kind of a nod to some of the maybe common critiques you might hear from gun rights folks about assault weapon bans. And what it does essentially is say that, what we're banning are, as the name suggests, gas operated firearms. And they go into this they try to get into the wonky detail about, blowback systems and direct impingement systems and all these different common operating systems. And what they end up describing just turns out to be all semi-automatic firearms are essentially covered.
Because it's not actually gas operated. They say it's gas operated guns, but if you read the text, that's not actually what they define. The way they define gas operated means recoil operated or blowback operated is included in there.
Right.
So
and essentially just encompasses all semi-autos. And then to get around how extreme that would be, obviously, they just carve out gas operated guns that they think are okay. So, for example, most recoil operated handguns get carved out. Any shotgun of any kind, at least in the federal proposal, was carved out, whether or not it had any of these banned gas systems and was semi-auto. So that's essentially, it's not a very precise, it's a clever way to try to obviously rebrand an assault weapon ban, but it's not very precise in terms of its definitions and its technical aspects.
I think the effect is very similar
and perhaps even more. Restrictive.
Probably a little bit broader. But very similar otherwise.
But the news hook of this was, this federal ban got introduced and it didn't go anywhere. It's still sitting in the Senate and hasn't even been taken up for any kind of vote.
Yeah, they voted on the regular assault weapons ban shortly after this got introduced.
Yeah, that's right.
Which also didn't go anywhere.
So that kind of tells you federally, at least, where that's headed. But New Mexico's governor, who has been pushing for an assault weapon ban and failed last session in 2023, said, I'm going to try this GOSAFE Act this time around, basically trying to take the purported strategy of the federal folks saying that this will help us. We're not going after those cosmetic features. We're doing technical stuff. And she pitched that to her legislature to try to get that across the line. And so we were obviously following this because this would be an interesting test case of, does it actually make a difference how you brand an assault weapon ban? And maybe can you get some traction with a new strategy? And, as the results at least demonstrated this time around, it doesn't seem like it helped all that much. The New Mexico GOSAFE Act was voted out of committee. So it actually made it on a party line vote out of committee, but it was never brought up for a floor vote in either chamber. And that's despite, gun bills were a very prominent feature of this session in New Mexico. They passed a 7-day waiting period for gun sales, and they passed a ban on carry at polling places. These were two priorities of their governor, Michelle Lujan Grisham. But this GOSAFE Act didn't go anywhere. So I kind of did a breakdown of the political side of this, and it just, at least early indications suggest that a rebranding effort doesn't really get you much.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting. Obviously, you had some caveats in there about there might be a special session the governor calls, or
she's teasing a special session. She hasn't committed yet. She did this last year as well, and they never ended up calling a special session. So we don't know how credible this.
Although I don't know why things would have changed. Right. Why would they change between regular session and special session on this?
Right.
Maybe they would, but I mean, it's pretty interesting because New Mexico is trifecta Democrat, right?
That's right. That's right. And obviously Grisham has sort of made her mark in gun politics lately by making it one of her chief issues. She most famously did the flat out ban on carry in Albuquerque. And which was struck down in court and had to be kind of reined in a little bit.
It didn't work.
So she
well
obviously
politically.
Right. Yeah. She even was rebuked by folks on her side of the aisle and allies. So yeah, it's interesting to see someone that outspoken on the issue of guns just not be able to get anywhere at least on this particular policy. Like, as I mentioned before, other gun control policies have passed and are still passing, but it doesn't look like this gun ban is going to go anywhere. And I think it's telling that other states this year that are also pursuing assault weapon bans are going back to the features-based. Colorado is doing it. Virginia passed a features-based ban. Rhode Island and Minnesota have introduced features-based bans. So it just doesn't seem like the GOSAFE Act.
Not signed. None of these have actually made it to law.
Right. Yeah. None of this is law. But at least that's, these folks are working with obviously the gun control groups, and it doesn't seem like there's a ton of energy other than New Mexico and then these small handful of senators for this GOSAFE Act proposal as of yet.
Yeah. And I think we talked about this at the time when they introduced this proposal in the Senate, in the US Senate. Because like one of the problems with this thing is that it's so much more, it's much more difficult to message because it's a lot more complex. It also, like, it's poorly written because it doesn't actually do what it says it does, because the authors clearly don't understand what gas operated is, or, they made a total jumble of the actual text of the legislation, and it's much harder to message on. Like, gas operated semi-automatic is not as easy to sell, I think, as a scary thing as assault weapon, right? The whole point of assault weapon is that it's like a good brand for the gun control people because it sounds threatening.
It gets to a point that we've made before with like the Biden ATF regulations, right? You announce something like this and gun owners know what you're talking about and it riles them up. But the common public is like, what the hell's a pistol brace, or what the hell's a gas operated gun? So we're not going to even fight for this because we don't even know what it means. Yeah. It mobilizes opposition because obviously gun owners know what a gas operated gun is and they know what you're getting at. So,
and they understand the implications of what would actually happen if this was passed. And so, I mean, like, it's also funny because, it was sold as like this way to address the shortcomings of your traditional assault weapons bans, which really focus on cosmetic or ergonomic features like pistol grips and adjustable stocks and flash suppressors, things like that, which people also don't. If you did the flash suppressor ban bill, nobody's going to understand what that is in the general public. But if you call it an assault weapons ban, well, people can understand that assaulting is bad generally. And so, it's bad branding, I think, is the point I'm getting at. This is a different critique than talking about what it actually does and whether that's good or bad. But very clearly, the branding effort here doesn't make sense. And especially because if your argument is that you're fixing these shortfalls because assault weapons bans have traditionally been poorly written and full of, ways to get around them because they're not based on how the gun actually works or the ammunition it uses or whatever, these common critiques of these sorts of laws, you would think that you would produce something that was technically sound and instead they call it a gas operated semi-automatic ban. And then they just define gas operated as things that are gas operated and then things that aren't gas operated. So, and then you make weird carve outs like the shotgun one. You can have a gas operated semi-automatic shotgun under the gas operated semi-automatic gun ban for some reason. Right. You can have a gas operated semi-automatic handgun under the gas operated semi-automatic gun ban for some reason. I mean, the reason is like, it's basically just goes back to the same reasoning that the assault weapons ban has different things that are accepted from it. They just, because they're trying to get at a certain kind of gun, the AR-15 primarily, and without banning things that they don't think are as scary, even if they're very similar in nature, like, the Mini 14 or a semi-automatic shotgun. These things are pump action shotguns, which were considered to be a war crime by the Germans in World War I. The pump action shotgun that all Democrats, including the president, think are perfectly reasonable, weapons for everybody to own, were actually the Germans in World War I thought that those were war crimes to use in the trenches. So just sort of irony of history, I guess, and how some of these things come out. But it's just, it clearly hasn't worked though. Like to your point, like it just didn't work. It didn't garner any more support than your traditional assault weapons ban.
Right.
And I think we identified early on why it wouldn't.